think once the door is open, as it was since 1978, I mean, even the remote regions of China, peasants can see through television what outside world is like, you know? I mean, even just to see a football match, you can see what's like. And Chinese are not stupid. Once they see, you can't close it again. And the mind is open.
The Chinese people are in the middle of their third revolution of the 20th century. In 1911, the nationalists under Sun Yat-sen overthrew the Manchu dynasty and the Empress Dowager. In 1949, the communists under Mao Zedong overthrew the nationalist government. Today, communist centralization and strict party control are being replaced by something quite different. They call it the responsibility system. It's carried out by communists within a communist system. It's a revolution nonetheless. The architect is the 80-year-old Deng Xiaoping, China's effective leader. 7 years ago, he introduced reforms which have started to transform China's economy, have opened the door to the outside world, and are opening the minds of the Chinese people. In the first stage, the 800 million people living on the land were set free. After a decision by the Central Committee in December 1978, individual farming households were given responsibility for tilling the land allotted to them. The spectacle of large brigades of regimented peasants working the land under collective supervision has vanished. It's been replaced by the family group, working as they think fit, knowing they'll benefit directly from what they grow. In the second stage, the decision on economic reform issued last October, the 200 million city dwellers were given similar opportunities to exercise responsibility. The guidelines for China's third revolution are in place. Is it working? Can it last? How is it changing life for China's billion? Chinese themselves can only answer that question by comparing life today with life under that other so-called revolution, the Cultural Revolution. Then society was turned upside down, lives disrupted or even lost, values destroyed, opportunities denied. Things couldn't be more different now.
Shanghai, Shanghai, longing for you all the day through.
They're certainly visibly different in Shanghai. Here, people are always quick to catch a change of mood. They know as much about China's revolutions as anybody. If the Shanghainese are letting their hair down, that means something for China as a whole.
In Shanghai, Shanghai, land of my dreams and you.
For some, the opportunity exists to exercise both a new freedom and new responsibility. Tang Feng-lo is unusual in some respects, but typical in others. Tang is writer, publisher, and translator. This year, he'll publish 4 books on fashions, start up a monthly magazine on international cinema, start a business dubbing foreign films into Chinese, and finish correcting his novel for publication. What drives Tang on is not just the 8 years he lost in remote rural exile during the Cultural Revolution, it's also the destruction of his wife's entire career and way of life. Young Li Kun was a celebrated film star, 20 years ago a household name, but her film came under political criticism, and so did she. Today, Li Kun bears the marks of the torture which caused a mental breakdown and the denial of medical treatment at the time. Subsequent treatment has brought about an improvement but no cure. It's victims of the Cultural Revolution, such as his wife, that Tang wants to help with the proceeds of the money he'll make from his 3 ventures. And he's concerned too that the 8 years exile in the countryside and the waste that represents shall not be an experience that their twins or anyone else in the present generation will have to suffer. Tang's hopes for the future are as large as his memories of past suffering is intense. That's what drives him on.
I had been kept as a prisoner just because I wrote a very short story. The content of the story is about the love affairs of a young college student.
And you were put in prison for that?
Yes, by the so-called 造反派. That is the rebellion, called the organization.
And how free are you now to write what you want?
I was allowed to stay at home for the whole year to write my stories, because in 1981 I've finished a novel. I just want to make some correction. Now, the writers, not for me personally, just for all the writers, they can write whatever they want to write now.
Are you confident that the present atmosphere in China will continue even after Mr. Deng goes?
I think so. I think so, and I hope so also. Because the policies pursued by Deng Xiaoping are wholeheartedly supported by almost all the Chinese people and the cadres of the party. The most important thing for our party to do now is to choose faithful successors now. Yes.
Who will continue the present policies?
Yes. So, every successor must continue the policies by Deng Xiaoping. We are enjoying much freedom now, much freedom. For example, I can talk whatever I want to tell with my friends. It sounds strange to you foreigners, you know. In the old days, I mean, before the downfall of the Band of Four, the husband even will not tell the truth to his wife.
And what is the atmosphere now?
Most of the Chinese people are frank. If you ask them questions, they will answer you frankly, just like me.
You feel as if this is the end of a nightmare?
Somewhat. I found myself waking from a nightmare. Sometimes, because of the past bitter experience, I even couldn't believe what I was doing now. No. It sounds like a fairy tale, but it really happened.
For millions of other Chinese today, it really has happened too. Memories of the Cultural Revolution are fading. New opportunities are pushing aside old bitterness. It's no crime now to get rich. The new party line encourages you to chance your arm in the marketplace. The consumer's voice is to be heard. The diligent and hard-working will get paid more. The lazy will earn less and be punished. That's socialism with Chinese characteristics, as set out in the party's October decision. As a result, the atmosphere in the country is changing.
Do you feel there's a new mood of selfishness or materialism in the country?
Oh, terrible, terrible. But this didn't start from now, because actually this materialism, at least is understandable, and also not so, how do you say, vicious. I mean, human beings are selfish, which is understandable, right?
And they've had so little for so long.
Yeah, which is sort of normal human behavior. But during Cultural Revolution, they are forced to be selfish, forced to protect themselves in order to survive, forced to persecute others in order to survive themselves, you see? If they don't persecute others, they can't survive themselves. They will be persecuted. Unless you persecute others, you can't avoid being persecuted. You see what I mean? Well, you see, I mean, that's really much worse, of course.
The Chinese are in the middle of another revolution, as different from the cultural revolution as it could possibly be. It's a consumer revolution. It began in the countryside, it's taken off in the towns, and has produced a simply extraordinary change in their outlook and expectation and attitudes. Of course, they tell you, we've got the money to buy a colour television set. It's just that it's a little hard to find the ones we want to buy. And it is impossible to overstate how much and how fast the communist Chinese are now catching up, however belatedly, with the attractions of late 20th century materialism. It's taken for granted that a child, and you're only allowed to have one, is the greatest good of all. But with personal spending increasing at 8% a year recently, more and more Chinese have given their precious single child a home filled with the so-called four goods: fridge, cassette radio, washing machine, and, of course, a television. Colour, if you're lucky enough. Some fear the four goods are fast becoming the four gods, that nothing can staunch the Chinese rush to buy. It may be incongruous for a Japanese fridge to be wheeled away on a bicycle, but it's no longer an unusual sight in the East Wind market of Peking's main shopping street. In the last 5 years, all these goods have come within the reach of millions of Chinese. The shop's turnover has increased by a fifth each year as a result. Such bewildering products of the outside world are not only to gaze at, but to buy. A prized 14-inch colour TV set costs the equivalent of a year's wages for many city workers. Even a black and white set will cost up to 4 months' pay. Yet last year, this store sold 12,000 colour sets and 50,000 black and white sets. As far as the manager is concerned, if he could get more sets, then the sky would be the limit.
如果无限供应的话呢，我年可以销10万以上。
5 years ago, would you have believed that you'd be in this position today?
5年前是没有想到的。
As another satisfied customer walked off proudly with his heart's desire, the manager observed shrewdly, what's happening now in China is that the economy is running the economy. The October decision on urban reform recognized that an economy which acknowledges the working of the marketplace needs a radically new style of management if the sheer intensity of consumer demand is to be met. Peking's largest department store regularly has 120,000 people through its doors each day. On holidays, it'll have 170,000. Its record to date was an unimaginable 210,000, a human tide of purchasing power. To meet it, sales staff now get better bonuses. As a result, wages have doubled in a year. And just as the cut of the traditional Chinese suit is slowly giving way to what they see as the more businesslike style of the Western suit, so the power of the party's secretary has given way to the new authority of the manager. Peking's #1 department store is now run by one of the country's new men. He has no doubt who's in charge. He is.
我的任务就是一个是组织群众所需要的货源，来满足市场供应，满足群众的需要，这是第一点。第二点呢，要让我的雇员，也就是说我们的售货员，服务态度要很好，对顾客主动、热情、周到，使他们感觉买了东西以后心里很高兴、很满意。主要是这2项任务。
But don't you also have to make profits? Isn't it your duty to make a good profit?
啊，利润呢，那是当然的了，利润也是我们的重要任务。
The new materialism has produced an often lopsided standard of living for many, such as Tang Wenjiang, who drives a car for a living. He wanted to be a doctor, but the Maoist upheavals robbed him of a university education. For the moment, the new materialism is the only satisfaction he and millions like him have. Tang lives near the center of Peking with his wife Jingmei and their baby daughter. Jingmei has a job too, and between them, they earn a good deal of money. But the flat they live in highlights the dilemma city dwellers find themselves in. There's an acute shortage of housing, so the Tang's flat is small, drab, and not even their own. They share it and its basic amenities with another family. And the kitchen is basic. while the bathroom has a distinctly Spartan air too. All the present-day status symbols of Chinese materialism are crowded into a single room with a concrete floor. The Tangs have all four of the modern fall goods. The fridge shares pride of place with a brand new and still unused washing machine. But the Chinese concede there's something wrong with an economic system which is still so bad at supplying houses while providing the things that go inside them. The Tang's only hope is that things will continue to get better.
反正我自个儿吧哈，拿我自个儿来说，反正就前几年吧哈，就是吃和穿的问题吧，就不如现在的那什么条件好点儿，能够穿点什么毛料子，或者是以前是就只穿个布的，最起码的最条件好一点的就是底下凉的，现在能穿上什么毛的了，什么一些个东西呢，都使得比较高级一些东西，所以呢，我觉得比前两年条件好点。
What would happen if anybody tried to turn the clock back?
很惋惜了，因为我们目前是在搞经济革命，所以这个生活水平呢要逐渐提高。一旦要搞不好，或者不是说这事儿，万一就是谁想改变这个的话，那对我们的生活，起码对我们个人生活是很有影响的，对国家那就是也是一个不好的这个什么。
反正我觉得那个。中国吧，反正应该是越变越好，比四化。现在不是要实现4个现代化吗？哈，以后呢10个4现代化的以后呢，还得要是越好，越来越好，比实现4个现代化的还要好。所以呢，我们的生活呢也就好起来了。
In the northern industrial city of Tientsin, the Communist Party has decided to meet the people's consumer wishes. It has built a pleasure dome. A single glance immediately recognizes it as by Covent Garden Piazza out of Xanadu. It's called, functionally, Restaurant Street. Years ago, the Communist Party effectively destroyed the retail food trade. Now it has decreed that the people must have somewhere to eat and even to dance. In just 100 days, the people of Tientsin saw this officially sanctioned temple to the new hedonism built before their very eyes. If 20 people club together, they can hire the dance hall. One small step for the Chinese, a leap for the Communist Party.
2 years ago, dancing is forbidden. And now we're allowed to dance. And I think most Chinese young men like dance very much. There's all kinds of policy. It's getting more and more sensible, reasonable, dependable. Our economic policy and urban transformation. Of course, now we're very poor, but I think most young men want to build our country, want to take our country getting more and more rich.
So both individual enterprise and consumer wishes now have a place in China. The party accepts that central control, state department stores and state businesses can't meet these needs adequately. Decentralization must reach right down into the marketplace. If an individual wants to start a shop, the party won't prevent that. It was in 1979 that Mrs. Zhang Zhanying and 12 other unemployed young people set up their tea stall here. They had no capital, but they borrowed £10 from local old ladies who had a few savings. They had no premises, but they got 2 benches, they bought 4 buckets for boiling water and the bowls, and they were in street business. In Chinese terms, they got on their bike, and they pedalled it a long way since, pioneering a route which others have followed. The company that has grown from those modest beginnings now stretches along 2 blocks and has a sales area of 2,000 square meters. Officially, it and others like it are called Young People's Collectives because they were started to deal with unemployment among school leavers. 3/4 of the people who work here are under 25. They're proud of the store and know that its success depends on their commitment to it. Competition to join is so keen that you now have to sit an exam to be considered. Financially, it's been a huge success, with a turnover of millions of yuan and its own capital base. What started with a loan of £10 now has capital reserves of £1.5 million. Everyone in the collective is free to join and free to leave for another job if they want to. That's unusual in China. It's possible here because they combine individual incentives with management freedom, and the results speak for themselves. In industry at large, China's managers face their greatest opportunities and their most daunting challenge. Last October, the party called for a mighty contingent of managers to invigorate the economy. The Shanghai machine tool factory is the largest of its kind in China and regards itself as very advanced. They even export some machines to Japan. But most of their equipment is Chinese, ingeniously adapted with ideas borrowed from abroad. As things stand, the hortatory slogan, "Make products of excellent quality and catch up with the most advanced levels in the world," is a mere pipe dream. A fifth of all Chinese industrial equipment is at best technologically backward. A further 3/5 is considered fit only for the industrial scrapyard. The Chinese have two answers to the problem of what they call invigoration. In factories such as this, the party's secretary used to have the final say. Now the manager has full responsibility and makes all key appointments throughout the plant. That's the responsibility system. Attitudes to work and rewards have to change too, according to the party. Paying those who work hard has now become an official socialist principle, sandwiched between one poster about good discipline and another warning against time wasting is a third, which reveals the full extent of the change taking place. Egalitarianism will lead to the destruction of the forces of social production. They've learned from bitter experience. At the height of the Cultural Revolution, this factory lost 50% of its output for 3 years running. Those days, they say, are now over.
The director of the plant have more power than before. He can decide the production planning and decide how to use the retained earning.
Has he sacked anybody? Have any workers been dismissed?
Yes, he can hire and fire the workers.
In many ways, Shanghai is the most extreme place in China. It was the most extreme politically during the recent period of leftism, and even amidst the classical pillars, traces of that mood still survive today. It was the most extreme in being forced to accept the great European commercial invasion of banks, merchants and trading houses in the 19th century. Their monuments still give the city an incongruously European look. Now there are signs that Shanghai, producing almost 1/10 of China's total industrial output, is once again to lead the way to managerial modernization. Even in today's China, you wouldn't expect to find an exclusive businessman's club, but that's exactly what the Select Entrepreneurs Club is. Its premises may be modest, a few rooms in a comfortable hotel, but its ambitions are not. Its 500 members, representing 150 enterprises, pay a staggering £800 a year for the privilege of belonging, even, they believe, of influencing the government. Mr. Zhao runs a pen factory. Before, central planners only allowed him to make fountain pens, not ballpoints. Now he can make what he likes. Mr. Gu runs a toy factory. According to the plan, that meant he could make only toys. Now he's branched out into the leisure market because he believes that's where demand lies. The new voice of Chinese management is making itself heard.
Do you value the freedom you've now got?
我非常珍惜。我认为我们国家这个30多年来啊，经济建设上不去，比较落后，就是在领导体制上面呢，原来没解决这个问题。所以中央和政府呢，从去年开始，当然摸索了好几年了， 实行这个城市经济体制改革，包括领导体制改革呢，这对我们搞生产、搞经济建设的同志呢，就好像这个老虎添了翅膀。
So are the Chinese going capitalist, as some outside observers say? Well, leave aside the fact that what they call capitalist roading is still a pretty dirty phrase here. I'm not sure that the word capitalist is a very useful one to describe what is going on. For a start, the Chinese point out that there's no private ownership. It's all owned by the state. Then they'd argue there's no exploitation of class by class. And finally, they're still sticking to their 4 principles, which include Marxism-Leninism and keeping to the socialist road. And all of that is a very long way away from anything we'd recognize as capitalism. Certainly, leading members of the Chinese government, including one of the Prime Minister's own deputies, are polite but firm on the subject.
我们认为这个社会主义跟资本主义有个很大的区别。社会主义是要求公平分配，能够共同富裕，但现在还做不到，现在只能一部分人先富起来，以后慢慢大家都富裕的。那么所谓资本主义，看起来经济是发达的，但贫富是先熟的。我到了你们英国、法国都看到这个现象。
So you're satisfied that China is not following that economic model?
不会走哪一条道路，但是他一些办法、一些措施，特别是经营管理方法，我们认为应该修习。
Minds are opening in a country which has always found it easy to retreat behind its defences and to shelter within its own intellectual self-sufficiency. But in 1985, China has reached 2 conclusions. First, that only an open door to the outside world can break open a generation of closed minds. Second, while that process takes place, China does not think that a major war with one of its neighbours is likely. Its priorities are the 4 modernizations: industry, agriculture, technology and defence. But although defence comes last, neighbours should not draw the wrong conclusions. China's armed forces are being shaken up by the new values now prevailing. The 4,000 elite officer cadets at China's newest military academy at Shijiazhuang are pointing the way to an entirely new kind of army. They represent a rejection of the ideals of the old People's Liberation Army in everything but name. They're no longer would-be guerrillas, swimming among the people like fish in the sea. Gone are the baggy trousers, the soft hats, the casual manner. The spit and polish, the intense discipline, the professional pride are the marks of a new elite. From now on, the values to which they subscribe are managerial, not political. China's armed forces know there's a gap between what they'd like to be, fully modernized and equipped armed services, and what they have the money to be. They know the equipment on which they're training is old-fashioned. Most of it is Soviet-built or Soviet-derived. It represents what Western observers recognize as Korean War stuff. China is slowly building up its own arms industry, but there's no sign that the army's firepower will be anything but enthusiastic rather than sophisticated for years to come. Yet when the time does come, China's army is determined to have the men, the outlook and the training to use weapons of the future in a war of the future. This academy is a major step towards that goal. It was the 12th Congress of the Communist Party in 1982, whose resolutions hang over the main door of the academy, which set the guidelines for the kind of army that's starting to emerge now. They said it had to be scientific, it had to be modern, above all, it had to be professional. They still call it the People's Liberation Army, but really it's a People's Army in name only. Any visitor from West Point or Sandhurst would recognize Shijiazhuang as having adopted many of their values. But the values are intellectual as well as military. No officer will leave without a degree as well as a commission. All of them will have a qualification in computers as well. If the PLA is distinctly short of modern command and control equipment, if NATO's dream of a computerized battlefield is a space age away for China in practice, at least China's future officers will know what they should have in theory. And there are other changes ahead. In June, the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping confirmed that the overall strength of the armed forces will be reduced from 4 million to 3 million. With that sort of slimming down, China's officers and the men they lead can't afford to be anything but professional. China's military counter-revolution will be complete when ranks and badges of rank are restored. Everyone knows that the decision to restore them in principle has already been taken. The word in Peking is that ranks will return in practice next year. The emphasis openly placed here on quality, efficiency and order would warm the heart of the sternest sergeant major at Aldershot. They're also values the Chinese leadership would like instilled into the people at large: innovation, self-discipline, modernization. So when the passing out troop rehearse their march past, they're looking ahead not only to what they want to be, but what the country wants to be as well. The army may be only the last of the 4 modernizations, but it's undoubtedly pointing the way. China's high hopes for modernization come first and foremost from its success in the countryside. Making agriculture a priority appears to be blindingly obvious for a country with 800 million people living on the land. In 1949, Mao Zedong led a revolution based on the peasantry. The Russians said you needed an industrial proletariat to make a revolution, but Mao's trust in China's peasantry was justified in practice. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping again turned communist orthodoxy on its head. Agriculture was to be the foundation of the economy, not heavy industry. Working in a regimented way in what was known as the brigade system was abolished. Instead, each family was made responsible for its own land. Across China today, the individual endeavors of 800 million people living on the land have transformed the countryside and laid the foundations for the economy as a whole. Loying village is in Chuxian district in Anhui province. In many ways, it's exactly what you'd expect a village in the heart of China to be like, with animals and human beings mingling in easy and customary familiarity. But Loying is special because it led the way.
As long ago as 1962, the responsibility system was pioneered in this area. There'd been a terrible natural disaster. The local authorities decided the best thing to do was to tell the farmers to get on with it. Output soared, it was an enormous success, but the national authorities said it was taking the capitalist road, and it was cancelled. So when it became official policy in 1979, this area took to it with special enthusiasm.
As a result, incomes have quadrupled in 5 years and grain yields have doubled. Not that Loying is exceptionally rich. They say it's at the bottom of the middling range of rural prosperity. Surrounded by ponds, they act as a natural cooling system in central China's oven-like climate. Its basic amenities are still basic. Old mud houses are a reminder of the way of life from which the villagers are emerging. New brick houses are being built. The dream is of a 2-story house.
我姓张，我叫张志强。我原来住的呢是4间土墙瓦顶房子。83年呢，我盖了呢7间楼房，一共花去呢人民币呢8000余元。
Farmland is desperately short in China. During the 2 decades of collectivization, it wasn't used efficiently. But today, farmers have an incentive to use every resource, it makes them money.
以前在生产队呢是收入是100元左右，现在呢承包水面呢是2亩田，是养鱼呢是1000尾，各一期呢是副业收入是1000元，农夫各一期是3000元。
我叫王友祥，我家8口人，在没承包之前，我家人均收入150元，承包以后，我家人均收入850元。我打算在今年再盖一栋楼房。
Even here, there are signs of a revolution to come. The universal water buffalo is starting to be challenged by the tractor. And small-scale industry, the real revolution in the countryside, has shown the corner of its face and its apparent promise of wealth previously unknown.
我叫吕福金，去年我家收入9000元，平均每人1500元。今年元月份我买了4台机床，今年年底 可以纯利用收入2万元，加上农田收入5000元，常年可以利润25000元。最近我准备买一台小型汽车。
Mr. Liu is the shape of things to come. China's rural simplicities have to accommodate to the harsh realities of China's continued population pressure, 100 million new mouths each year. Even China's farming New Deal can't feed those mouths and make people better off at the same time, though the achievements of that New Deal mustn't be underrated. The vast North China plain stretches with an exhausting and inexhaustible sameness to the mountains north of Peking 150 miles away. Here and elsewhere in China, the individual efforts of farmers increased grain output by 5% last year. They expect 5% more this year. And this has been achieved at a time when official grain quotas have been abolished. Farmers can now grow whatever crops they think will make them money. It's true that the land devoted to grain is falling, but output is rising. For agricultural growth in the 5 years of the responsibility system has been 3 times as great as it was in the previous 20 years of collectivization. Chinese ministers don't bother to conceal their satisfaction at this state of affairs.
情况我认为是很好。我经常用一句话来形容中国农村的改革，叫做出现了农业奇迹。在5、6年以前，你在北京的街上有时候还可以看到讨饭，现在没了。
And is that as a direct result of the agricultural miracle, as you call it?
对，这个现在去年我们的粮食总产量也突破了8000斤，就是人均一个人有800斤粮食了。所以能够吃饱了，吃饭问题应该说可以说是解决了，但是发展是不平衡的，有的偏僻的农村现在还穷。
For the most part, China's 800 million rural dwellers, 4/5 of the population, have come to enjoy a standard of living undreamed of in the past. But the miracle of the last 5 years can't be repeated. It was a once-for-all release of energy. Normally, these people would start to drift into the cities in search of a still better life. But China's cities would burst at the seams. So the official solution to keeping the people fed and prosperous in the countryside is to move industry to them. Dachu, 80 miles east of Peking, has turned to light industry. Working conditions for villagers and much of the machinery are reminiscent of the less attractive early stages of the Industrial Revolution. But here and elsewhere, such long-term considerations take second place to the basic need to raise living standards. Dachu is special in one sense. It's a village with 24 light industries, which has seen those working full-time on the land fall from 1,200 to a mere 150. The people took the logical next step. They turned the whole village into a company. Any one of Dachu's 3,000 villagers is free, in theory, not to belong to the company, In practice, everyone does. And the village company is building a company town on the Henry Ford principle. You can have any design of house that you want, so long as it's like everyone else's. For what Da Chu reveals is that the communes may have been wrong for farming, but collective effort makes sense for common construction. So their spirit survives in the new rural industries. The commune, in other words, is not dead. It's just that now it's called a company. The mastermind of Da Chu's commercial success is the general manager, Yu Zhuo-min. He just happens to be party secretary as well. As a lifelong member of the party, he's adopted its new values with skill and alacrity. 5 years ago, no party secretary would have been running an enterprise and proud of making an annual profit of £3 million. The village offered Mr. Yu a salary of £50,000 to manage the company. He turned it down for a more modest £7,000. That's more than the Chinese Prime Minister gets. Mr. Yu's instincts are fiercely competitive.
第二年、2年之后，3到5年当中，现在你们看了我们的设备，这个产品，这个加村贸比较还是落后。我们在3到5年当中，在世界先进水平的技术、产品、设备都搞这个，会赶上你们。
Mr. Yu's managerial style is distinctly on the grand side. He admits he's not a great one for talking to the people. As he sweeps into the village showcase, the new printing works, attended by a small flotilla of deferential aides, the company boss. All Mr. Yu and the Da Chu villagers want of the future is more of the same. But they reflect a central paradox of much of China's countryside. Present prosperity depends on light industry rather than farming itself. In more advanced areas still, the paradox is becoming a contradiction. Xianzhou Township, 80 miles northwest of Shanghai, exists in a semi-urban limbo. Its 21 component villages are officially part of the rural economy. But where does town end and country begin? 14% of all jobs in the countryside are now in industry. Xianzhou leads the way. Its 400 factories range from the very small to large electrical plants run by the township. 80% of Xianzhou's 40,000 people now find a living working in a factory. At the end of the day, there are few complaints from these people whose whole way of life has changed dramatically. Average incomes have quadrupled in 5 years. Social habits and behavior are changing.
Not so long ago, in villages like this, the standard of living was low and everybody knew who the richest families were. Now that there's very much more money around, there's also far more sensitivity, and people don't like to be known as being the richest family. And there's another aspect of the new prosperity, that is savings. They save a lot of money, they put it into the bank, they get 6% interest on it, and a lot of them are getting as much in interest as some people in the towns are actually earning.
The Tang family are known as one of the richest in Qitang village. It's part of Xianzhou Township. The household includes 4 generations of the family.
我的12岁的嘛是2间病房，那么现在辰光呢，烧着12间房子是内房，那么人民币呢用了4万。
The whole Tang household is an epitome of China's 5-year-old countryside revolution. But are they the hoped-for ideal? Is this the China of the future? Is the newfound materialism a deserved relief after generations of exploitation, or is it becoming an end in itself? Will China's bright new material goods prove to be toys which never quite work? Not long ago, it would have been unthinkable for a farmer's elder son and his wife to earn wages of £2,000 a year and to live in a room 3 times the size they could expect in the city. They might not recognize the phrase, but they're upwardly mobile. The Tang younger son has all the consumer goods bought, ready for marriage next year. But do they represent less a solution to the countryside's problems than an unsatisfactory compromise? It's understandable for their grandmother to accept these pennies from heaven with a calm philosophy. She has seen China's 2 major revolutions. She's experiencing the third. All she hopes is that they can keep what they now have.
To revert the present trend would demand one even more powerful than the leadership of Mr. Deng and his aides, and such a leadership you cannot find on the horizon wherever you turn your head to. I would not be surprised, say, there should be some minor fine-tuning as to, for instance, the speed of economic growth and minor policy changes. That would be likely. However, the general trend is set.
Yet there is a nagging doubt. The experience of the village of Dajai is a stern reminder that no one in China should count on anything lasting. A decade ago, Dajai was a model of self-help, approved by Chairman Mao himself. He told the whole nation to learn from Dajai, to follow its line. It became world famous as a village that carved its land out of the mountainside. The terraces are as much an art form as an economic achievement. There's no natural water here at all. It travels 40 miles from the nearest reservoir. It proclaims its arrival at Dajai in an aqueduct built by the villagers with their bare hands. It's practical, but above all monumental, a gesture of the grandest kind. But the villagers of Dajai now know the truth about those years. They could never have led to lasting prosperity. Such prosperity as they have today has come from the responsibility system and not the brigade system which it replaced. Yet despite that knowledge, villagers know too that when the Communist Party changes its line, they have no alternative but to obey.
你如果你是中央统一规定，就是都要成了这还回来原来那组织起来那个道路，那你我们也得组织起来。你说过去你是搞这农业下大灾，那时候咱们也是听中央的。你说现在我们落实中央的方针政策，因为给党中央要保持一致嘛，都得听他们的领导人的话。那我们现在仍然还得回来。
将来会怎样？谁知道将来怎样？你能否告诉我，将来会怎样？
Fears for the future are far from the minds of most people in China today, allowed as they are to live a little, make a little, spend a little. In Peking's night market, they come to buy, to choose, to express their personality as they couldn't before, to become less a face in the crowd, more a distinguishable individual. It may be that people have learned from experience that there's less fatalism, less resignation, less readiness to do what they're told. And such freedom can't be separated from freedom of thought. What emerges here is the sound of Chinese public opinion saying, quite simply, that it likes the way things are going.
I think most people would resist the change. Most people.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, most people will be against the change.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, I agree.
So everybody wants the policies that you have now to continue.
Yeah.
Yes, continue for a long time.
For a long time.
Yes, very long
That
time,
does
I
not
think so.
mean that everything is perfect.
The policy is
yeah.
the policy now is making people rich.
We must speed up. In the present speed, it's not enough.
You must speed up.
Yeah, we must have a high speed. In the present speed, I think maybe we can't catch up. We must make a faster speed.
Catch up with whom?
With, of course, the developed country, the advanced ones.
We should be more efficient.
The east wind blows strongly through China. The leadership calls it a wind of reform and invigoration. They insist that it won't change direction when Deng Xiaoping goes. It's blowing through a door that they've thrown open to the outside world, a door that's going to be hard to close.
I think once the door is open, as it was since 1978, I mean, even the remote regions of China, peasants can see through television what outside world is like, you know? I mean, even just to see a football match, you can see what's like. And Chinese are not stupid. Once they see, you can't close it again. And the mind is open, not only just, you know.
That's a revolution, if that's true.
That is. I mean, I think that is the basic, I think that is the only, how do you say, guarantee that China is not going to turn back drastically.
But in the end, words and resolutions from the Communist Party can't diminish the vast task ahead for the Chinese people. The immediate aim is to quadruple the economy in the last 2 decades of this century. Chinese leaders say openly that on the centenary of the revolution, the year 2049, they will be a fully modern, rich and still socialist country. They're taking the first steps now. But the distance China must travel makes the long march look like a stroll in the countryside.
At 8:30 this evening, you can see the second of 3 films about the Chinese countryside, getting close to the everyday lives of the people of one village in China. And this Wednesday evening, David Jessel takes us behind the bamboo screen to have a look at a whole range of Chinese television programs, which give a unique insight into the changes taking place throughout China. That's on Wednesday evening at 8:05.